What's going on, everybody? AJ Shulo here, going to give you guys a main event breakdown for UFC 264. In other words, the trilogy between Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier. Doing an earlier breakdown just because I got some time. I had the fight researched. I actually did extended tape study for both of these guys. Not because I wanted to necessarily learn more, but just I'm so intrigued with both of their careers. Obviously, I did want to learn more. That's a bonus. But just going back, watching all their fights, going way beyond a few years ago now, some of their fights, just to see how everything transpired, because the two of them have really truly remarkable careers, and it's pretty crazy that how things transpired. We got a trilogy here, obviously, because Dustin knocked out Conor the second time, the first guy to ever knock out Conor in professional mixed martial arts. Conor knocked out Dustin the first time in the first round. Dustin did it in the second round. So it creates for an interesting fight here. I actually do believe that this is the most highly anticipated fight in the sport right now. I think the first one prior to this, before we saw the rematch take place, was Diaz McGregor III. But obviously, since Poirier is the guy to knock out Conor, the first guy to knock him out, and Poirier with the rise that he's been on, he's just been a lot more consistent than Diaz in terms of actually, fighting in the octagon with frequency. And, at this point, he's got a huge name as well. So when you consider the dynamic of how each fight went, where they're at in their respective careers, and got to think that the winner of this fight gets a shot at the lightweight title holder, who is right now Charles Oliveira. Stakes are certainly high. I think it's a good card overall. I do think that this card has depth beyond the main event. And, we got a good co-main event. We got Gilbert Burns taking on Stephen Thompson. We got some, ranked fighters in the middleweight division, the women's bantamweight division. So I do think that this isn't necessarily a fight night card where it's just the main event carries the whole card. I actually do think there's some good depth here. We got some good prospects on the prelims, and we got all that good stuff. But you guys are here to listen to the main event, of course. I'm here to preach it, and let's get down to business. Getting into this matchup, we got to pick them here on most books that you could look at. I'm recording this here on Thursday, July 1st. So this is way in advance. So again, if you're listening to this next week and you're if odds did change and you're oh, AJ, Poirier is a favorite or McGregor is a favorite now, it's because it's Thursday, right? I can only go based on the odds, what I see here today, right here, right now. So again, stakes are high, 1-1 going into 3. The second fight, I did have a bet on Poirier. He was a big underdog there, plus 250. Those odds were just absurd in my humble opinion. Right now, where the odds currently are, I think they're much more accurate. Whether you want to know for a fact whether or not I placed another bet on either fighter's money line, you'd have to go to dailyfanmma.com on the betting hub section. Shout out to Dailyfan MMA. Awesome website. Super happy to be contributing there. Brett Apley and the crew, Technical Tim, Chris. Shout out to all you guys. That would be where you'd find my bets. I have 2 posted up for the bet or for the event. So quick plug right there. But what I'm trying to say is, getting into this matchup, why they were off the second time, that is because there's Conor McGregor has clear strengths and weaknesses in his game. I've always thought the same thing about him, and I even acknowledged going into the rematch that Conor could still beat Dustin, but it had to be, I think, early. You look at Conor's MO throughout all of his fights. Even going back to the boxing match against Floyd Mayweather, Conor is one of, if not the most dangerous guys in rounds 1 or 2, pound for pound, because he has very good pull counters, very good reactive timing. He's got very heavy hands. He's good athletes. He's explosive. Southpaw striker. Some consider him the best in the sport. I've never been a big fan of McGregor's defense in the past, but from his offensive perspective, his offensive production, the southpaw pressure style, countering you, just a lot of heavy shots. It's all very effective against opposition, especially considering that Conor has always shown an iron chin for the vast majority of his career. More on that, though, in a moment. And so he's just a very hard guy to deal with in rounds 1 and 2. He's just such a confident fighter. He's just not afraid to take the damage. He could take your damage, fire back the counters, and it's much more often than not, these fighters, they can't take his shots. He's able to win the vast majority of his fights by knockout in rounds 1 or 2, right? That's the key word. He's actually never won a fight by stoppage in the UFC beyond the second round. And it's because Conor McGregor more than once has shown vulnerable cardio. And this is something that I'm not the first one to bring this up. There's been many people that have brought this up, but it needs to keep being readdressed, especially when you see a guy as such a heavy favorite. And I'm referring to the odds in the rematch. When you see a guy as like a minus 300 favorite, and he's only got about, 1.5, 2 solid rounds of cardio in him, you're basically if you're betting Conor at that line, you want to have a lot of conviction that he's going to go out there and finish the job in rounds 1 or 2, because history has proven more than once that when the fight's extended, he tends to fatigue significantly. Against Floyd Mayweather, started to slow down, and in round 3, round 4, Floyd started walking him down, landing more shots. Floyd was able to rock him several times in the last round that they fought, the 10th round, and earned a TKO stoppage. That was a boxing match, right? And I get it. Boxing, there's more rounds there, but again, it's 3-minute rounds, not 5. You get more rest in there, and it's just boxing. Conor didn't have to worry about no clinching, not often at least, because in boxing, the referee's separating you pretty much promptly upon you closing the distance. You're in close quarters, that sort of thing. And there's, of course, no wrestling, and there's no, traditional grappling on the ground. So in theory, he's getting the type of fight that he wants. Doesn't have to worry about kicks. It's just hands. And Conor still got tired. Looking into even the Nate Diaz fights, both of them. First fight against Nate Diaz, I get it. He fought up a weight class. He was preparing to fight Rafael dos Anjos at 155 pounds, but he still gassed around the 7-minute mark. Nonetheless, it just wasn't the best look. Just seeing him go out there and just flat out gas and basically just tap due to fatigue. Looking at Conor, I've never actually thought he's been a bad grappler. He actually holds a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt. It's just more so been an adversity thing. And once that point in his cardio hits where he tends to slow down significantly, he looks for a way out. We saw that in the Nate Diaz fight where Nate Diaz, he shot a sloppy takedown on Diaz. Diaz easily took his back, landed some ground and pound. Conor turned his back. Diaz got the easy rear naked choke. No resistance from Conor whatsoever there. So that was the first Diaz fight. Conor lost in the second round via rear naked choke. Even in the second Diaz fight, Conor just started to slow down in round 2. Diaz started coming on strong late. Conor still won the round because of the damage he did earlier in the round. He was able to knock down Diaz. But even like we saw in round 3, look at how Diaz closed out the round in round 3. He was flurrying on Conor. And in my humble opinion, had that fight gone on for a little bit longer, it could have easily been a stoppage there in round 3. But then Conor caught a second win in round 4. He won round 4. Granted, he was still tired. Diaz was fatigued from the leg kicks, from the damage he took earlier on in the fight. But granted, Conor fought through adversity there. That was nice to see. And we even saw that against Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? Khabib did still slow down in that fight from all the ground and pound he was landing on damage. But look at how Conor was actually defending off of his back. Khabib was raining down all this ground and pound, but Conor was actually doing a solid job of making sure that the vast majority of those shots didn't get through. But it still got him tired. Round 3, the two were just basically standing the whole time. Conor won the round, but it wasn't like he was just out there just lighting up Khabib bell to bell. He was just out there, having the most successful Conor McGregor striking performance because of the cardio factor. And then obviously we saw in round 4, Khabib took Conor down, took his back, and Conor just gave an easy rear naked choke tap, just didn't even bother fighting the hands. But then even referencing back to the Nate Diaz fight, the first one, he's able to sweep Diaz from bottom. Diaz, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Like, that's very impressive. So we definitely have seen some glimpses from Conor, like looking good as a grappler. And so that's why my read is that it's been a cardio failure, which is why you've kind of seen him struggle in the later rounds. And so that's my rationale for like why I thought the odds were ridiculous then, why it makes me a bit hesitant to back Conor in general. I love Conor as a fighter, but when you just look at his history in UFC, it's been just basically first or second round knockout. And, every time he's been extended, he's struggled. Even the fight he won against Nate Diaz, the majority decision, he still struggled in that fight, almost got finished there. Right. So it's kind of like a similar Conor McGregor breakdown, like just analyzing him stylistically, because everybody gets so excited about Conor when he fights, and I get excited too, but people tend to sort of analyze his fighting style with their emotions on like the polarizing figure that he is, rather than just looking at him from a skill perspective. And so in this fight against Dustin Poirier, it's a very interesting matchup, a southpaw versus southpaw type matchup. I think it'll be contested on the feet. Obviously, Dustin took Conor down in the first fight very briefly. Conor just butt scooted back to the fence, got his way back up to the feet pretty much right away. There were some clinch exchanges there. They were basically 50-50. They both had some success pushing each other against the fence. But again, the fight should be contested on the feet for the vast majority of the time. I'd be pretty surprised to see Poirier go out of here and just take Conor down with consistency, unless if Conor's just completely gassed in the latter rounds. But even then, there's times where Poirier's just generally uninterested in going for takedowns. But should he get in top position here and Conor's just completely spent, I could see Poirier getting a finish. He's actually a very underrated submission grappler. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt is Poirier. The thing I don't like about him is he does tend to pull guard a lot. He does settle for the bottom position at times. Don't think that'll be an issue here because Conor doesn't go for takedowns himself. but it is still something that, could hurt Poirier nonetheless. Maybe Conor ends up in top position. He's able to rest a little bit, seal out a round with some top control and win that round. Who knows? I'm just kind of thinking outside the box here, but mainly won or lost in the feet. Southpaw versus Southpaw. They're both very potent offensively, but they're also both moderately hittable defensively. Both, if you're a stats guy, they both absorb north of 4 significant strikes per minute with 54% defense per UFCstats.com. Conor's defense in these 2 most recent fights against Cerrone and Poirier has looked better. He's done a better job of like blocking with his arms, like keeping his arms up, and like, done a better job of like tucking his chin slightly. Whereas before, if you like say his fight against, you see his fight against Eddie Alvarez, it's like his chin is up, his hands are down, and he's like all reliant on like his range management, slipping out of range, landing those counters, landing those damaging strikes, and hurting Alvarez, and even in his earlier fights as well. But it was nice to see that from a technical perspective, Conor shore that up. Now, of course, if the fight gets extended, that would naturally mean that Conor's arms would begin to fatigue. His arms would begin to drop. His technique just wouldn't be as sharp as it was in the later rounds because, again, he doesn't have great cardio. And it's tough for me to bank that Conor's cardio is all of a sudden going to improve here because he's just kind of been with the same camp. Like, I think that even though Conor's an improving fighter, I still think that, the boundaries are set to where he excels and where he doesn't. And so in this fight against Dustin, I think he could have success early. He won round 1 the last time. I think he could have success touching Dustin up. Dustin did admit after the fight that he did hurt Conor did hurt him rather in the first round. Dustin, to his credit, put on a really good poker face. Nobody really saw it. And so that Conor just is the guy that I think is going to be walking forward more, landing the harder shots early, being the more confident guy. But we've seen from the second fight, I shouldn't have said confident, just the more the guy more willing to walk forward more. The guy willing to, just take the center of the octagon and just kind of march Poirier down. And Poirier will probably be on his back foot a little bit, firing off some counters. Maybe he throws those calf kicks again. Those caught Conor by surprise. Conor did adjust to those in the Diaz rematch. He did start to check them. He threw some leg kicks of his own. We see Poirier struggle with leg kicks in the past, more specifically the Justin Gaethje fight and the Jim Miller fights. He was hurt there from some leg kicks. And so I'm not to say that Dustin can't have success in rounds 1 or 2. I think he certainly can. Obviously, we saw in the rematch he did. He knocked Conor out in the second round. But I think that when Conor here is going to be most successful, it's going to be in the earlier rounds when he's the most fresh, landing the harder shots. And just out of the southpaw stance, it's just a bit tougher for him to counter than, say, if he was countering an orthodox fighter. We saw that in the Eddie Alvarez fight where, granted, I did think that Conor looked just sharper there from the eye test. He just looked so much faster. His punches were just so on point, that sort of thing. Just traditionally, I think it's easier for him to land those sort of strikes. Just he's able to have a fighter that will oblige to his power side, whereas the southpaw, it's obviously the same stance that he operates out of, so it won't be as easy for him. And so when we got that, I just think that if Conor does not finish this fight in rounds 1 or 2, it's going to be a long night for him. I favor Dustin's cardio. Dustin's cardio it's not elite. We have seen him slow down. He slowed down against Max Holloway in round 3, but he definitely does have better cardio than Conor does. He definitely has shown to fight a hard 5 rounds. We saw that in the Dan Hooker fight. We saw that in the Max Holloway fight where he landed north of 150 significant strikes each in both fights. Able to hurt durable guys. He hurt Max Holloway several times. Max Holloway's shown an iron chin for years. He's never been knocked out or knocked down. He's been rocked like in the past, like once briefly in the last few years against Jose Aldo. But other than that, Max Holloway is ultra tough to hurt. And then it's a great win for Dustin, especially now considering the performance that Max put on back in January. So Dustin should be the guy that if this fight does go to rounds 3, 4, and 5, I would favor him there. But I still do think he could have success in rounds 1 or 2. And getting more into the dynamic, going back to the chin point of Conor, right? Conor throughout his whole career has shown a great chin. He was able to take some big shots by Chad Mendes, who just hits like an absolute truck, and just never even seemed fazed by him. And then now, just looking back at his last few fights, we saw him rocked against Nate Diaz in the first fight. We saw him rocked several times by Floyd Mayweather. We saw him knocked out by Dustin Poirier. So this is his first time being knocked out professionally. And I get it. There were some calf kicks that got mixed in there. That was part of the reason why I think that Conor, that led to the stoppage. But it was still a bad stoppage nonetheless. He definitely got flurried on against the fence. He definitely took a lot of damage there. And this is just, about 6 months ago now. So who knows how long, or if this is enough time for Conor to recover. I mean, I don't think Conor would come back in such a short amount of time if he wasn't ready. He's more of a strategic thinker. But again, it's still a concern I have for him nonetheless. And it's his first knockout loss. You just never know how his chin is going to hold after that going forward. Now we know that Dustin could hurt him. Going into my breakdown the last time, I actually didn't think that Dustin would knock him out early. I think that Dustin would weather an early storm and then win the fight should it get extended. But now we know that Dustin could hurt him early. And that, makes the pendulum swing more in favor of Dustin, in my opinion, that is. So got this fight. Either guy could have success in rounds 1 or 2, but then Dustin, should this fight get extended, he's just been the much more active guy in the octagon. Again, he went 10 rounds with Max Holloway and Dan Hooker, whereas Conor, just look at what he's done in MMA in the past few years. I mean, he's got one win against Donald Cerrone that lasted 40 seconds. And yeah, it was a good performance by him and everything, but like, he barely got extended there. He barely got tested. So it didn't really tell me a whole lot where Conor was at. He just faced a guy that was a great style matcher for him on paper. We know Cerrone in the past has struggled with guys that, are southpaws that like to pressure him, that are fast starters. And Conor checks all those boxes. So in hindsight, it wasn't a huge surprise to see Conor go out there and get a quick knockout. I know a lot of people in the community had bets on Conor there, even though he was a big favorite. But this matchup is just far different to me. And I was just scratching my head, even at the odds, because Conor was a bigger favorite against Dustin than he was against Cerrone. But Dustin's a much better matchup than Donald is. So that's why it was just also perplexing to me. But as I mentioned, these odds are just definitely much more reasonable now this time around. But I still got to favor Dustin Poirier here. Like I said, I think either guy could have success with the leg kicks. I do think that Conor will look better here just because he's more motivated. I think he wants to get one back, but I still got to question his motivation nonetheless. I mean, it was, he could have walked away in theory after his, masterful performance against Eddie Alvarez, where he just, captured both titles, double champ, the champ, first guy to ever do it in the UFC. And then he fights Floyd Mayweather, and obviously he lost a clear stoppage, clearly that is, lost in dominant fashion, but he still made a bunch of money off of that fight against the best boxer, some consider the best boxer, best defensive boxer, in my opinion, in the history of the sport. And that could have been a good time for him, where he's at his peak of his hunger, his motivation. And now that he's out there, just collecting all these checks, he's got a whiskey business, he's got all this stuff going on. It makes me really question how motivated Conor is. I do think he's motivated to some extent, but is he as motivated as he was when he was rising through the ranks, when he was trying to capture 2 belts? I'm not quite there right now. I mean, again, with the title at stake, the winner of this fight probably gets Oliveira, with him wanting to get one back against Dustin. I think that'll fire him up a bit more. But I mean, he's gone on record and said in the past more than once that he has retired. So he's just kind of been a bit uncertain as to what he wants to do with his career. And I just kind of question where his head's at least with Dustin. We do know that he really wants this, and he's more motivated the two, just being more consistent. Stuff he's been saying in interviews, just saying that the stakes are so high here, and that he knows where Conor's motivation is, what his motivation is. Dustin just seems to have a more, clear outlook on his near future. Whereas like Conor, it's just still kind of in limbo, to be honest. So it's just a totally different dynamic than it was, 7 years ago when they fought in 2017 than compared to when they fought earlier this year. Conor was bad mouthing Dustin, just getting in his head. Dustin admitted that Conor pointing at him when they were doing walkouts really messed him up. But now it's just kind of like the roles were reversed, right? Conor was acting polite during the press conference. He was applauding Dustin for making weight, and Dustin of the two was the one doing more taunting during the fight. There was even times where Dustin was countering Conor hard, and he was pointing at him and he was touching him with a jab. And then Conor was able to react to it. So there's definitely a much different, not just physical dynamic here, but a mental dynamic than there was in the fight 7 years ago. It's just Conor. They're both so different. But I got to think that the hungrier guy here, Dustin, the guy that I think will win the fight should it get extended, and a guy that could have success in the early going, whereas Conor's just kind of limited to doing damage in the first 1 or 2 rounds. So if Conor wins, I have to think it's because he knocked Dustin out in rounds 1 or 2 when he's got cardio in his system, a lot of it. But if the fight gets extended or even ends early, that's where I favor Dustin as well. So official prediction is going to be Dustin Poirier. He will be my pick. That'll do it for this breakdown, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said earlier, breakdown. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. As I mentioned beforehand, if you'd like to tail my best for this event, you could go to dailyfanmma.com on the betting hub section or on betmma.tips /AnthonyS364. Thank you guys so much. Have a nice week.